The first time I saw him, he was just a shadow against the sunlight. A small figure huddled in the corner of an enormous bedroom, where even the air felt expensive. Like everything else in the DeMarco mansion, it was pristine, perfect, and utterly cold. "You're the new girl?" Mrs. Alvarez, the head housekeeper, barely glanced at me as she pushed open the heavy mahogany door. Her voice had the texture of steel wool. "This is the East Wing. You don't clean here unless specifically instructed." I nodded, clutching my uniform, starched and uncomfortable against my skin. It had been only 3 days since I'd started working at the estate, and already I felt like an intruder in a museum where touching anything might set off invisible alarms. "Yes, ma'am," I whispered, my eyes wandering to that small shadow. There was something about the stillness of the figure that made my chest tighten. Mrs. Alvarez followed my gaze, and her expression hardened. "That's the young master. Marco DeMarco Jr. You are not to disturb him under any circumstances." She lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. "Mr. DeMarco doesn't like the staff interacting with his son. Remember your place." The warning in her voice was unmistakable. But as she turned to lead me back to the servants' quarters, I heard it, so soft it could have been the wind outside the tall windows. A sniffle. The shadow moved slightly, and I realized it was a boy, perhaps 7 or 8, sitting on the floor with his back to the wall. His knees were pulled up to his chest, his face hidden. That was the moment I should have turned away. That was the moment I should have remembered I needed this job more than anything, that my younger sister's medication depended on it, that the rent on our tiny apartment was already 2 weeks late. I should have remembered that in the 3 months since our parents' accident, I was all Lucia had left. But I've always had a problem with doing what I should. "I'll catch up," I said to Mrs. Alvarez, who had already reached the door. She turned, her eyebrows rising sharply. "Elena, now, 1 minute," I said, surprising even myself with my boldness. "Please." Something in my voice must have reached her, because after a moment of tense silence, she exhaled sharply. 1 minute. Not a second more. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded like a prison gate locking. I approached the boy slowly, the way you might approach a wounded animal. As I got closer, I could see him more clearly. Dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. Expensive clothing. A small button-up shirt and tailored pants that probably cost more than my monthly salary. But what struck me most were his eyes. A striking blue like deep water, staring straight ahead at nothing. "Hello?" I said softly, crouching down a few feet away from him. He didn't turn toward me, didn't react at all. "My name is Elena," I continued. "I'm new here." Still nothing. But the sniffling had stopped. I moved closer, and that's when I noticed something I should have seen immediately. His eyes, though beautiful, weren't focusing on anything. They were moving slightly, searching but never finding. "You're blind," I whispered, more to myself than to him. That got a reaction. His chin lifted defiantly. "So what if I am?" His voice was small but carried a familiar edge, the sound of someone used to defending themselves. "Nothing," I said quickly. I heard you crying." "I wasn't crying," he said immediately, wiping quickly at his cheeks. "I never cry." "Of course not," I agreed. "My mistake." A hint of a smile touched his lips before quickly disappearing. "You're going to get in trouble, probably," I admitted. "But I'm good at getting out of trouble, too." That wasn't entirely true. At 22, I had a talent for finding trouble, not escaping it. It was how I'd ended up raising my 16-year-old sister alone, working 3 jobs, and still barely making ends meet. "They don't like it when people talk to me," the boy, Marco, continued. "Papa says the staff might hurt me because I can't see it coming." Something cold settled in my stomach. What kind of world did this child live in, where everyone was a potential threat? "Well, I would never hurt you," I said. Then, acting on instinct rather than reason, I reached out and gently took his small hand in mine. "See? Just a hand to hold." His fingers tightened around mine instantly, like he was grabbing onto a lifeline. The desperation in that grip broke something inside me. "Elena." Mrs. Alvarez's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Your minute is up." I gave Marco's hand one last squeeze before standing up. "I have to go now. But maybe I'll see you tomorrow? I won't see you." he said with a touch of wry humor that seemed too old for his young face. "But I'll be here." As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me again, so quiet I almost missed it. "Thank you for noticing me." 4 simple words that would change everything. I didn't see Marco the next day, or the day after. The DeMarco mansion was vast. 3 stories of old money and new power, with wings and rooms that seemed to multiply each time I tried to map them in my mind. Mrs. Alvarez kept me busy in the West Wing, far from where I'd met the boy. It was only on my 6th day that I heard the rumors. "You're new, so listen carefully," said Camilla, another maid who had been working at the mansion for nearly 3 years. We were folding fresh linens in the laundry room, a rare moment without immediate supervision. "The master of this house isn't just some rich businessman," I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Camilla glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "Marco DeMarco Sr. runs half the criminal operations on the East Coast. People who cross him disappear." I nearly dropped the sheet I was folding. "You're saying he's a mafia boss?" "The mafia boss," she corrected, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you think security here is so tight? Why do those men in suits patrol the grounds day and night?" I had noticed the security, of course. The guards at every entrance, the cameras watching our every move. I'd assumed it was just how the ultra-wealthy lived. "If he's so dangerous, why work here?" I asked. Camilla smiled thinly. "The pay is triple what we'd make anywhere else, and he treats the staff well, as long as we follow the rules." Her expression became serious again. "But the most important rule is to stay away from his son." "Why?" I couldn't help asking, thinking of the lonely boy I'd met. "The boy's mother died giving birth to him. They say the boss never remarried because he never got over her. The blindness is a birth defect. Mr. DeMarco is protective. Overprotective," I muttered. "Dangerously so," Camilla corrected. "A nanny once took Marco to the garden without permission. She was fired on the spot and blacklisted from working anywhere in the state." "That seems excessive for taking a child outside." Camilla's face darkened. That was the official story. Unofficially, they say Mr. DeMarco thought she was planning to use the boy as leverage. The rumors about what happened to her after she was fired, well, let's just say no one has heard from her since. A chill ran down my spine. I thought of Marco, isolated and crying alone in that vast room. A prisoner in a gilded cage. "The boy needs someone," I said quietly. Camilla grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in sharply. "Elena, listen to me. Whatever you're thinking, stop. Your sister needs you alive and employed. Mr. DeMarco is not someone to cross." She was right, of course. I had responsibilities. Lucia depended on me. But all that night, as I lay in the small room I shared with 2 other maids in the servants' quarters, I couldn't get Marco out of my mind. His small hand clutching mine, his quiet thank you for simply being noticed. Sometimes the most dangerous decisions don't feel like decisions at all. They feel like inevitability. 2 days later, I found my opportunity. Mrs. Alvarez assigned me to clean the library, an enormous room with shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with books that looked like they'd never been opened. It was adjacent to the East Wing, where Marco's room was located. I worked methodically, dusting each shelf, each leather-bound volume, keeping an eye on the ornate grandfather clock in the corner. At precisely 2 p.m., the shift change for the security detail occurred, a brief 5-minute window that Camilla had mentioned offhandedly. As soon as the clock struck 2, I slipped out of the library and down the hallway toward Marco's room, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. The door was slightly ajar, and I peered inside. The room was empty. Panic fluttered in my chest. Had they moved him? But then I noticed a second door on the far wall, leading to what looked like a private sitting room. I crossed the bedroom quickly, my footsteps silent on the plush carpet. Through the doorway I could see him, sitting by a large window, his fingers tracing the patterns on the glass. "Marco," I called softly. He turned instantly, his unseeing eyes widening. "Who's there?" "It's Elena," I said, stepping closer. "We met a few days ago." Recognition dawned on his face, followed by something that looked dangerously like hope. "The maid who held my hand? That's me," I confirmed, moving to sit across from him. "I wanted to check on you." "You shouldn't be here," he said, but he was smiling now. Papa wouldn't like it. Then we won't tell him, I replied conspiratorially. It can be our secret. Marco leaned forward, his expression suddenly serious. I'm good at keeping secrets. I have to be. There was something in his voice that made my heart ache. What secrets did an 8-year-old need to keep? Do you want to talk about why you were crying the other day? I asked gently. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. My tutor quit, he finally said. They always quit eventually. I'm sorry, I said, not sure what else to offer. It's not that, he continued. Before she left, I overheard her talking to Papa. She said I was unteachable, that my blindness makes me, he struggled with the word, a burden. Anger flared hot and sudden in my chest. That's ridiculous. Being blind doesn't make you unteachable or a burden. How do you know? There was a challenge in his voice, but beneath it, a desperate need to believe me. Because my uncle lost his sight when I was a teenager, I said, the words coming out before I could think them through. It wasn't true. I had no blind uncle, but the lie felt necessary in that moment. He learned to do everything independently. He even taught me how to play chess without seeing the board. Marco's face lit up. Really? Could you teach me? And that was how, on a Tuesday afternoon in the most dangerous man's home, I began giving secret lessons to his son. First in chess, which I barely knew myself and had to study from books in the library each night, and later in whatever subjects caught his interest. Our meetings became a fragile routine. 3 times a week, during the security shift change, I would slip into Marco's rooms for 20 precious minutes. I brought him small treasures, a smooth stone from the garden, a feather fallen from a bird, anything with interesting textures he could explore with his fingers. In return, he gave me glimpses into his isolated life, how his father visited him every evening but rarely touched him, how he had never left the estate grounds, how he sometimes pressed his ear against the window, trying to imagine what the world beyond the walls might sound like. It was during our 4th week of secret meetings that disaster struck. We were sitting on the floor, my hand guiding his, as he learned to write his name in the special notebook I'd brought him. Pages with raised lines he could feel. I'd been so careful about the time, but somehow I'd lost track. What exactly do you think you're doing? The voice from the doorway turned my blood to ice. Deep, controlled, and lethally quiet. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was, but I did anyway, slowly rising to my feet. Marco DeMarco Sr. stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. He was taller than I'd imagined from the few glimpses I'd caught of him, broad-shouldered and imposing in an impeccably tailored suit. But it was his eyes that paralyzed me. The same striking blue as his son's, but cold as a winter sea. "Papa!" Marco scrambled to his feet, his face a mixture of excitement and fear. "This is Elena. She's teaching me to write." Mr. DeMarco didn't look at his son. His gaze remained fixed on me, calculating and merciless. "Marco, go to your room," he said, his voice deceptively gentle. "But Papa—" "Now, Marco." The boy hesitated only briefly before gathering his notebook and walking with practiced ease to his bedroom, closing the door behind him. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Sir," I began, "I can explain." "You were specifically instructed not to interact with my son," he interrupted, taking a step forward. One of the suited men moved to block the doorway, my only exit. Yet here you are, alone with him, touching him. "I was teaching him," I said, finding a thread of defiance despite my fear. "He's bright and curious and lonely." Something dangerous flashed across his face. "You presume to know what my son needs better than I do?" "No, sir, but—" "You are terminated, effective immediately," he said coldly. "Collect your things and be off my property within the hour. Anthony will escort you." The suited man at the door stepped forward. This was it then. Not just the loss of a job I desperately needed, but possibly worse, if the rumors about the nanny were true. My thoughts flew to Lucia, waiting for me to come home on my day off tomorrow. Would I even make it home? In that moment of pure fear, I found my voice. "Your son was crying," I said, the words tumbling out. "The day I met him, He was alone and crying, and no one noticed. No one but me. I took a breath, steadying myself. He told me his tutor called him a burden because of his blindness. Is that the kind of people you want around him? People who see only what he can't do instead of all that he can? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Mr. DeMarco's face. The bedroom door opened, and Marco stepped out. Papa, please don't send Elena away. She's my friend. She doesn't treat me like I'm broken. Mr. DeMarco turned to his son, and I witnessed a transformation. The cold, calculating crime boss softened, kneeling to his son's level. Marco, he said gently, we've talked about this. The staff are not your friends. They work for us. Elena is different, Marco insisted. She teaches me things. She helps me. Mr. DeMarco glanced back at me, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to the suited men. Wait outside. After they left, closing the door behind them, he stood and faced me directly. Why? He asked simply. It was a question loaded with danger, but I answered honestly. Because everyone deserves to be seen. Really seen. For who they are, not what they lack. Mr. DeMarco studied me for what felt like an eternity, his eyes revealing nothing. I stood my ground despite the trembling in my legs, acutely aware that my future, perhaps even my life, hung in the balance of his decision. 2 days, he finally said, his voice low and measured. You will continue with whatever you've been teaching my son for 2 days, under supervision. Then I will decide whether you stay or go. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a reprieve. I released the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, he replied coldly. You've already broken my trust once. It won't happen again. With that, he turned to Marco, placing a hand on his shoulder. I'll see you at dinner, son. Then he was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive cologne and unspoken threats. Marco's face broke into a wide smile the moment the door closed. You're staying. I managed a weak smile in return, my knees finally giving out as I sank into a nearby chair. For now, at least. Papa will let you stay permanently, Marco said with the unwavering confidence of a child who still believed in his father's infallibility. You'll see. I wasn't so sure, but I didn't have the heart to dampen his enthusiasm. Instead, I reached for the notebook we'd been working on before the interruption. Let's continue with your writing practice, I suggested, pushing aside thoughts of what might happen when my 2-day trial ended. The supervision turned out to be a silent, suited man named Vincent, who stood in the corner of the room during our lessons. His expression impassive as he watched our every move. His presence was unnerving, but Marco seemed unfazed. Vincent follows me everywhere when I leave my rooms, he explained when I commented on it. Papa says it's for my protection. Protection from what? I asked, keeping my voice low. Marco shrugged. Bad people who might want to hurt me to get to Papa. That's why I don't go outside much. The casual way he accepted this, the normalization of danger, of being a target, made my heart ache. Have you ever been outside the estate? I asked. Marco shook his head. Papa says it's too risky. I have everything I need here. Everything except freedom. Everything except friends. Everything except a normal childhood. I glanced at Vincent, who was pretending not to listen. Maybe someday soon you could go to the garden at least. It's beautiful this time of year. Marco's face lit up. Could you describe it to me? So I did. I painted pictures with words, the riot of roses climbing the stone walls, the perfectly manicured hedges forming a maze, the marble fountain at the center where water danced and sparkled in the sunlight. With each detail, his expression grew more wistful. I can smell the roses sometimes when my window is open, he said softly. I wish I could touch them. Vincent shifted in the corner, checking his watch. Our session was nearly over. Maybe you can someday, I said, gathering my teaching materials. Don't give up hope. As I prepared to leave, Marco reached for my hand, finding it unerringly. A skill I'd noticed was improving with each of our sessions. Promise you'll come back tomorrow? I promise, I said, squeezing his small fingers. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. Vincent escorted me from the room, remaining silent until we reached the servants' corridor. You're playing a dangerous game, he said abruptly, startling me. His voice was deeper than I'd expected. I'm just teaching a child, I replied, defensive. Vincent's eyes, dark and surprisingly kind, met mine. No, you're changing things that have been the same for years. The boss doesn't like change. A chill ran through me. Are you warning me to stop? I'm warning you to be careful, he corrected. Marco has never had anyone but his father. Now he has you too. That makes you... He hesitated. Significant. Before I could ask what he meant, Vincent turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the unsettling feeling that I'd stumbled into something far more complex than I'd realized. That night, I made the weekly phone call to Lucia from the staff telephone in the kitchen. My sister's voice, bright and chattering about school and friends, was a lifeline to normalcy. When are you coming home? She asked. The question she always ended our calls with. Tomorrow afternoon, I promised. We'll go for ice cream, maybe see a movie? Yes, she exclaimed. The new superhero one just came out. I laughed, momentarily forgetting my troubles. Superhero movie it is. I love you, Lucia. Sleep well. Love you too, Ellie. I hung up, the nickname she'd used since childhood bringing tears to my eyes. What was I doing? Risking our precarious stability by getting involved with Marco DeMarco. If I lost this job, the consequences would fall on Lucia too. Family? The question came from behind me. I whirled around to find Mr. DeMarco himself standing in the kitchen doorway, watching me with those penetrating blue eyes. He'd traded his suit for more casual attire, dark slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, but somehow looked no less intimidating. My sister, I managed to say, wondering how long he'd been listening. He nodded, moving further into the kitchen. Every instinct told me to leave, but I remained rooted to the spot as he approached. You have tomorrow afternoon off, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. I visit my sister once a week. And you promised her ice cream and a movie. Again, not a question. He had been listening. I swallowed hard. Yes, sir. He studied me for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, placing it on the counter between us. For your sister, he said simply. Consider it a bonus for your work with Marco. I stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. Sir, I don't... It's not a bribe, Elena, he interrupted, a hint of impatience in his voice. It's compensation for the extra duties you've taken on with my son. Slowly, I reached for the envelope. It was thick, and I didn't need to open it to know it contained more money than I'd make in a month. Thank you, I said, uncertain what else to offer. He inclined his head slightly, then turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused. What movie? The question caught me off guard. Excuse me? What superhero movie are you taking your sister to see? The incongruity of discussing superhero movies with a Mafia boss made me dizzy. The new Marvel one, I think. She loves those. Something almost like a smile touched the corner of his mouth. So does Marco. In theory, at least. He's never been to a movie theater. The implication hung in the air between us. Unspoken, but clear. I held my breath, waiting. Perhaps, he said after a moment, you could tell him about it when you return. What it's like to sit in a theater, the sounds, the smells. I could, I agreed cautiously. But wouldn't it be better if he could experience it himself? I regretted the words as soon as they left my mouth. I'd pushed too far, overstepped once again, but instead of anger, Mr. DeMarco regarded me with something like curiosity. You don't fear me, do you? The question deserved honesty. I do, I admitted, but not as much as I care about your son's happiness. He considered this, his expression unreadable. A rare quality, he said finally. Enjoy your day off, Elena. After he left, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, the envelope clutched in my hand, wondering what kind of man Marco DeMarco Sr. really was, the ruthless crime boss of rumors and whispered fears, or the father who noticed what movie his blind son might want to see. The next day, as Lucia and I sat in the darkened theater sharing a large popcorn, my thoughts kept drifting to Marco. What would he make of the explosions that rumbled through the surround sound system? The smell of butter and candy? The collective gasps and cheers of the audience? You're not watching, Lucia accused, nudging me with her elbow. Sorry, I said, forcing my attention back to the screen. Work stuff. She rolled her eyes, a gesture so teenaged it made me smile. You're always thinking about work lately. Is it that bad? No, I said slowly. It's actually interesting. Interesting how? She pressed, her attention fully diverted from the movie now. I hesitated. How could I explain Marco to her without revealing the dangerous world he lived in? There's a boy there. He's blind. And he's never been allowed to do normal things like go to movies or even play outside. Lucia's expression softened. That's awful. Why not? His father is very protective, I said carefully. But I've been teaching him, spending time with him, like you did with me after Mom and Dad died, she said quietly. The parallel struck me forcefully. Perhaps that was why Marco had gotten under my skin so quickly. He reminded me of Lucia in those first dark months after the accident. Lost, isolated, needing someone to simply see her pain and acknowledge it. Yes, I whispered. Like that. Lucia squeezed my hand. You're a good person, Ellie. That boy is lucky to have you, if only it were that simple. But as the movie played on, a plan began to form in my mind. A dangerous, possibly foolish plan that might cost me everything. But some risks, I was starting to believe, were worth taking. When I returned to the mansion that evening, I went straight to Mr. DeMarco's study, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. The guard outside the door eyed me suspiciously. I need to speak with Mr. DeMarco, I said with more confidence than I felt. He's busy, the guard replied flatly. It's important. About Marco. Those were the magic words. After a brief hesitation, the guard knocked on the door, spoke quietly into it, then stepped aside to let me enter. The study was exactly what I'd imagined a Mafia boss's inner sanctum would be. Dark wood, leather-bound books, and a massive desk behind which Mr. DeMarco sat, watching me with those unnerving blue eyes. This had better be important, he said by way of greeting. I took a deep breath. I want to take Marco to the movies. His expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Excuse me? He should experience a movie theater. I pressed on, the words tumbling out now. We could go during a weekday matinee when it's nearly empty. Vincent and your security could sweep the place beforehand. I'd stay with him every second. Mr. DeMarco leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving my face. You've given this some thought. Yes, sir. And what makes you think I would ever agree to such a risk? I took another step forward. Because you love your son, and love sometimes means taking risks for someone's happiness. For a moment, I thought I'd gone too far. Mr. DeMarco's expression hardened, his jaw tightening visibly. Then, to my astonishment, he laughed. A short, sharp sound devoid of humor. You have extraordinary nerve, Elena, he said, rising from his chair. He moved to a cabinet on the far wall, pulling out a crystal decanter and pouring himself a drink. Most of my employees wouldn't dare suggest how I should parent my son. I'm not suggesting how to parent him, I countered, surprising myself with my boldness. I'm suggesting how to give him a small piece of the world that every child deserves to experience. He turned to face me, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. You know who I am, what I do. The danger isn't an exaggeration, Elena. There are people who would hurt Marco to get to me. I understand that, I said softly. But is complete isolation the answer? He's so lonely, sir. Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or guilt. Before it was carefully masked again, he took a slow sip of his drink, studying me over the rim of the glass. My wife, he said finally, would have liked you. The unexpected statement caught me off guard. Sir? Isabella was fearless too, always pushing me to be better, to see beyond my own narrow view of the world. His voice softened slightly at the mention of his late wife. She wouldn't have wanted this life for our son. He set down his glass and walked to the window, gazing out at the darkening grounds. 3 bodyguards minimum, he said abruptly. A private screening. I'll rent the entire theater. Vincent will coordinate the security details with you. It took me a moment to realize what he was saying. You mean... Yes, Elena, he said, turning back to face me. "You can take my son to the movies, once, as a test. If anything goes wrong, it will never happen again. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear," I managed, trying to contain the smile threatening to break across my face. "Thank you, sir." He waved a dismissive hand. "Don't thank me yet. And don't tell Marco until all the arrangements are finalized. I won't have him disappointed if the security team deems it too risky." I nodded, backing toward the door. "I understand. Good night, Mr. DeMarco." As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. "Elena." I looked back at him, my hand on the doorknob. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. "About a blind boy you barely know?" The question deserved honesty, because everyone deserves someone who sees them for who they are, not what they lack, I said, echoing my words from days earlier. "Marco is brilliant and kind and curious about a world he's never been allowed to explore. I just want to help him experience a small part of it." Mr. DeMarco studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "Good night, Elena." The next week passed in a flurry of preparations. Vincent, it turned out, was Mr. DeMarco's head of security, and he took the task of organizing Marco's first outing with military precision. The theater was booked for a private screening. The route was mapped and remapped. Background checks were run on every employee who would be present. Through it all, I kept the secret, continuing my regular lessons with Marco, biting my tongue each time he asked questions about the outside world. Finally, Vincent gave me the green light. The trip would happen the following Tuesday, during my regular afternoon session with Marco. "We're clear," he told me, handing me a detailed schedule. "But the boss wants to tell Marco himself." That evening, I was summoned to Marco's rooms after dinner. When I arrived, I found father and son sitting together by the fireplace, Marco's face alight with excitement. "Elena!" he exclaimed when he heard my footsteps. "Papa says you're taking me to the movies. A real movie theater." I couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. "That's right. Tuesday afternoon." "What will we see?" he asked eagerly. "The new superhero film," I said. "It has lots of exciting sounds and music. I think you'll enjoy it." Mr. DeMarco watched our exchange silently, his expression unreadable. But when Marco launched himself at his father in a spontaneous hug, murmuring thank yous into his chest, something in the crime boss's face softened. "Remember the rules," Mr. DeMarco said, gently disentangling himself from his son's embrace. "You stay with Elena and Vincent at all times. No wandering off, no talking to strangers. I promise," Marco said solemnly. As I turned to leave, Mr. DeMarco followed me to the door. "This means a great deal to him," he said quietly. "Thank you for suggesting it." Coming from him, the simple thanks felt monumental. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and hurried down the corridor. Tuesday arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp and clear, with a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. Marco, dressed in his finest clothes as if for a special occasion, could barely contain his excitement as Vincent helped him into the sleek black SUV with tinted windows. "What does the car smell like?" he asked, inhaling deeply as I buckled his seatbelt. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Like new leather and expensive cologne." "That's Vincent," Marco said with a grin. "Papa says he uses too much." Vincent, in the driver's seat, cleared his throat pointedly, but I caught the hint of a smile in the rearview mirror. As we drove through the massive gates of the DeMarco estate, Marco reached for my hand. "I'm outside," he whispered, awe in his voice. Really outside. My heart clenched at the simple statement. 8 years old, and this was his first real venture into the world beyond his father's walls. The drive to the theater took just under 30 minutes. Marco asked questions constantly, about the sounds he heard through the window, about how many cars were on the road, about whether the trees still had their leaves. I answered each one, describing everything I could see, painting pictures with words for him to grasp. When we arrived, Vincent did a final sweep while Marco and I waited in the car, surrounded by 2 other vehicles filled with DeMarco's security team. "All clear," Vincent announced finally, opening my door. I helped Marco out, guiding his hand to my elbow the way I'd shown him during our lessons on navigating with a sighted guide. "The theater is just ahead," I told him. "There are 5 shallow steps up to the entrance." He nodded, his face a mixture of concentration and barely suppressed excitement. Together, we walked into the theater, flanked by Vincent and another guard. The smell hit him first: butter, popcorn, candy, and Marco inhaled deeply. "It smells wonderful," he said, his unseeing eyes wide. "Like a holiday." I laughed. "That's exactly what it smells like. Would you like some popcorn?" His face lit up. "Can I?" "Of course. It's part of the movie experience." Vincent handled the transaction, returning with a large popcorn and 2 sodas. Marco's fingers explored the ridged surface of the paper bucket, the smooth plastic of the straw. "It's warm," he marveled, dipping his hand carefully into the popcorn. "Careful. It's hot," I warned. But he was already popping a piece into his mouth, his expression melting into pure delight. "It's perfect," he declared. We made our way to the theater itself, a space that seemed cavernous with only us and DeMarco's security team occupying it. I described everything to Marco: the rows of plush seats, the massive screen at the front, the dim lighting that would get even dimmer when the movie started. As we settled into our seats, Marco bounced with anticipation. "Will it be loud?" "Parts of it will be," I told him. "If it gets too much, just tell me, and we can step out for a break." But when the movie began, with its thundering surround sound and pulsing score, Marco didn't flinch. He sat enraptured, his head tilted slightly as he absorbed every sound, every line of dialogue. During action sequences, his hands gripped the armrests tightly, his face alive with wonder. During a particularly quiet scene, he leaned close to me. "I can feel the sound," he whispered. "It's like it's inside me." I squeezed his hand gently. "That's part of the magic." 2 hours passed in a blur of superhero battles and emotional moments that had even Vincent discreetly wiping at his eyes. When the credits rolled and the lights came up, Marco was quiet, his face contemplative. "Was it everything you hoped?" I asked softly. He nodded slowly. "Better. Much better." Then he turned to me, his unseeing eyes somehow finding mine unerringly. "Thank you, Elena. This is the best day of my life." The simple statement, delivered with such earnest gratitude, brought tears to my eyes. "Mine too, Marco." The drive back to the DeMarco estate was filled with Marco's excited chatter as he recounted his favorite parts of the movie, discussing the sounds and music with analytical precision that belied his young age. "Papa will want to hear everything," he said as the SUV passed through the estate gates. "Do you think he'll let us go again sometime?" I exchanged glances with Vincent in the rearview mirror. "Let's see how he feels about this trip first," I said cautiously. Mr. DeMarco was waiting for us in the entrance hall, his tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon light. Marco ran to him the moment Vincent helped him from the car, not even waiting for my guiding hand. "Papa, it was amazing," he exclaimed, his words tumbling out in a rush of enthusiasm. The sounds were everywhere, above and below and all around, and the popcorn was hot and perfect, and Elena described everything so I could see it in my mind. Mr. DeMarco caught his son in a rare embrace, lifting him slightly off his feet. "I'm glad you enjoyed it, Marco," he said, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. Over Marco's head, his eyes met mine, and in them, I saw something I hadn't expected: gratitude. Later, after Marco had been taken upstairs for his dinner, Mr. DeMarco found me in the kitchen, where I was having a quick cup of tea before returning to my regular duties. "Vincent tells me everything went perfectly," he said, startling me from my thoughts. I nodded, setting down my cup. Marco was wonderful, so well-behaved and appreciative of everything. "He can't stop talking about it," Mr. DeMarco said, leaning against the counter. "Or about you." I felt my cheeks warm. "He's a special child." "Yes," he agreed, studying me with those penetrating blue eyes. "My wife would have taken him to the movies years ago. She would have fought me on the security restrictions, the isolation." He paused, something like regret crossing his features. "I've been so focused on keeping him safe that I forgot about his happiness." It was the most personal statement I'd ever heard from him, and I wasn't sure how to respond. "You're protecting him the best way you know how," I offered finally. He shook his head slightly. "Perhaps. But protection without joy is just another form of prison. He straightened, his expression returning to its usual impassivity. We'll try another outing next month. Something different. Vincent will coordinate with you. With that, he turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. Elena? He said, not looking back at me. Yes, sir. Thank you for giving my son a piece of the world today. Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me to wonder at the complex man behind the fearsome reputation. A man who could order executions and thank a maid in the same day. Over the next several months, our tentative arrangement blossomed into something neither Mr. DeMarco nor I could have anticipated. What began as a single movie outing evolved into regular excursions, carefully planned, heavily guarded, but genuine adventures for a boy who had known nothing beyond his father's estate. We visited a children's museum with tactile exhibits designed for visually impaired visitors. We attended a symphony where Marco sat enraptured by the music that surrounded him. We even spent an afternoon at a small private beach that Mr. DeMarco owned, where Marco felt sand between his toes for the first time and listened to the rhythmic crashing of waves with an expression of pure wonder. With each new experience, Marco flourished. His confidence grew, his questions became more sophisticated, and his relationship with his father subtly shifted. Mr. DeMarco, who had always kept a careful emotional distance, began joining us occasionally, watching from the sidelines as his son discovered the world he'd been so determined to protect him from. My role in the household evolved too. I was no longer just a maid who had overstepped her boundaries, but Marco's official companion and teacher. Mr. DeMarco increased my salary substantially and moved me to a private room in the family wing, closer to Marco's quarters. It makes more sense logistically, he explained when I expressed surprise at the arrangement. And it provides an additional layer of security for Marco to have you nearby. I suspected there was more to it than practicality, but I didn't press. The truth was, I was growing as attached to Marco as he was to me. His joy in discovery, his resilience in the face of challenges, his unfailing kindness, they had woven themselves into the fabric of my heart. And then there was Mr. DeMarco himself. Enigmatic, complex, a man of contradictions who commanded fear and respect in equal measure. I began to see glimpses of the person beneath the feared Mafia boss. The man who listened to his son describe a concert with infinite patience, who personally researched adaptive technologies that might enhance Marco's independence, who sometimes watched me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher when he thought I wasn't looking. It was during this period that Lucia became a more frequent visitor to the estate. Mr. DeMarco, upon learning that I normally saw my sister only once a week, insisted that she come to the mansion on weekends. Family is everything, he said simply when I thanked him for the arrangement. Marco enjoys her company, and you shouldn't be separated from your sister so often. It was true. Marco and Lucia had formed an immediate bond. At 16, she had none of the awkwardness around his blindness that many people exhibited. She treated him like any other child, teasing him gently, reading him stories with dramatic voices, teaching him hand-clapping games that he mastered with surprising speed. One Sunday afternoon in early spring, as I watched them playing chess in the garden, Marco using a special set with raised squares and distinctive pieces, Vincent appeared at my side. "The boss wants to see you," he said quietly. "In his study?" I nodded, my stomach tightening slightly. Despite the months of increasingly comfortable interactions, being summoned to Mr. DeMarco's inner sanctum still triggered a flutter of anxiety. I found him standing by the window, watching Marco and Lucia in the garden below. He didn't turn when I entered, but he knew I was there. He always seemed to know when someone entered a room. A sixth sense born of years living in danger. "Sir?" I said, announcing my presence anyway. "You wanted to see me?" He turned then, his expression uncharacteristically troubled. "Yes, Elena. Please sit down." I perched on the edge of one of the leather chairs facing his desk, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "Is something wrong?" I asked when he remained silent. He moved away from the window, taking his seat behind the massive desk. "I received some concerning information this morning," he said finally, "about a potential threat." My blood ran cold. "To Marco?" "To my entire family," he corrected. "Which now, for all intents and purposes, includes you and Lucia. The statement, the casual inclusion of my sister and me in his definition of family, momentarily distracted me from the seriousness of his words. I don't understand, I said slowly. Mr. DeMarco leaned forward, his blue eyes intent. You know enough about my business to understand that I have enemies, Elena. Rivals who would use any means to hurt me or gain leverage. I nodded silently. One such rival has apparently learned of your importance to Marco, and by extension to me. He paused, his jaw tightening. There have been inquiries, people asking questions about the new teacher who accompanies my son on his outings. Fear gripped me, but not for myself. Lucia, I whispered. He nodded grimly. Precisely my concern. Your sister lives alone in an apartment with minimal security. She would be an easy target for someone looking to gain leverage over you. And through you. Over me and Marco. My mind raced with horrific possibilities. What do we do? I asked, my voice barely audible. Mr. DeMarco's expression softened slightly. I've already taken the liberty of dispatching a security team to your apartment. They're packing Lucia's essential belongings as we speak. Packing? I repeated, confused. She'll be staying here indefinitely, he said matter-of-factly. In the East Wing, near your quarters. I've arranged for her to continue her schooling with private tutors alongside Marco. It's the only way I can guarantee her safety. I stared at him, struggling to process the sudden upheaval. You can't just... Lucia has friends, a life that will be in constant danger if she remains where she is, he interrupted sharply. Then, in a gentler tone, I understand this is abrupt, Elena. But I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't believe the threat was serious. He was right, of course. If someone was targeting me to get to Marco and Mr. DeMarco, Lucia would be the obvious weak point. And yet, the idea of bringing my 16-year-old sister fully into this dangerous world felt wrong. What about when this particular threat passes? I asked. Will she be a prisoner here forever because of my connection to your family? Something flashed in Mr. DeMarco's eyes, surprise perhaps, at my directness. Not a prisoner, he said carefully. A protected member of my household. There's a difference. Is there? I challenged, emboldened by fear for my sister. Ask Marco if he knows the difference. It was a step too far. Mr. DeMarco's expression hardened. My son has everything he could possibly need. He wants for nothing. Except freedom, I said quietly. The same freedom you're now asking Lucia to give up. We stared at each other across the desk, the tension thick between us. Then, to my surprise, Mr. DeMarco sighed, a sound of genuine weariness. I'm not asking for Lucia's freedom permanently, he said, just until we eliminate this specific threat. A month, perhaps 2, and then we reassess the situation. He leaned back in his chair. I am not the monster you seem to think me, Elena. I don't take pleasure in restricting Marco's life or in disrupting Lucia's. I do what's necessary to protect those under my care. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. For all his ruthlessness in business, I'd seen enough of Marco DeMarco Sr. over the past months to know he genuinely cared for his son, and, it seemed, for anyone his son cared about. I'm sorry, I said finally. I know you're trying to protect her. It's just a lot to process, he finished for me. I understand, but the arrangements are already in motion. Lucia will arrive this evening, and I'd appreciate your help in making the transition as smooth as possible for her. I nodded slowly, accepting the inevitable. Of course, and thank you for protecting her. He waved away my thanks. As I said, she's family now. He hesitated, then added, as are you. The statement hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us was ready to examine. May I go tell Marco and Lucia what's happening? I asked, rising from my chair. Of course. He stood as well, coming around the desk to walk me to the door. An unexpected courtesy. Elena, he added as I reached for the handle, there's something else you should know. I turned back to face him, suddenly aware of how close we were standing. Yes? The reason this particular rival is targeting you specifically, he said, his voice low, is because there are rumors circulating that you and I are, he paused, searching for the right word, involved. Heat rushed to my face. That's ridiculous, I said quickly. Anyone who has seen us together would know that's not true. Something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Is it so ridiculous? He asked softly, before I could process the question, let alone formulate a response. He stepped back, his expression returning to its usual impassivity. Discuss the living arrangements with Lucia. We'll talk more about security protocols tomorrow. And just like that, I was dismissed, my head spinning with implications and unspoken possibilities as I made my way back to the garden. Lucia took the news of her relocation with surprising equanimity. So I get to live in a mansion with my sister, take private lessons, and hang out with Marco all day? She summarized as we sat on her new bed that evening, surrounded by the boxes that had arrived from our apartment. Doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world. It's not that simple, Lou, I said, folding one of her sweaters. This place, this family, it's complicated. She rolled her eyes in that quintessential teenage way. You mean because Mr. DeMarco is some big scary crime boss? She lowered her voice dramatically on the last words. Shh. I glanced nervously at the door. Don't talk about that so casually. Oh, please, Elena. I'm not stupid. I figured it out the first time I came here and saw all the security. Plus, everyone at school knows the DeMarco name. She shrugged. But he seems nice enough to me, and he obviously cares about Marco. And about you. I nearly dropped the sweater I was holding. What do you mean about me? Lucia gave me a look that suggested I was being deliberately obtuse. The way he watches you when you're with Marco? Like you're some kind of miracle worker? Trust me, that's not how bosses normally look at their employees. It's not like that, I protested. But the denial felt hollow even to my own ears. He's grateful that I help with Marco, that's all. Lucia hummed skeptically, if you say so. I changed the subject quickly, but Lucia's observation lingered in my mind, merging with Mr. DeMarco's own enigmatic question from earlier. Is it so ridiculous? Life at the DeMarco estate settled into a new rhythm with Lucia's arrival. What had begun as a temporary safety measure gradually evolved into a comfortable arrangement that benefited everyone. Marco thrived with Lucia's vibrant energy complementing my more measured approach to his education. Lucia herself blossomed under the private tutoring, her grades improving dramatically without the distractions of public high school. And I found myself in an increasingly ambiguous position, neither servant nor quite family, but something undefined that seemed to shift with each passing day. Mr. DeMarco, true to his word, eliminated the threat that had prompted Lucia's relocation. I never asked for details, and he never offered them, but the increased security measures gradually relaxed after about 6 weeks. When I tentatively broached the subject of Lucia returning to her school in our apartment, she surprised me with her response. I don't want to go back, she said simply as we sat in the garden watching Marco practice with his new adaptive computer. I'm doing better here. My grades are up, I'm actually learning things, and I'm not constantly worried about you working yourself to death to pay the bills. But your friends, I still see them on weekends when Vincent drives me into town, she countered. And honestly, Elena, most of them were never real friends anyway. They were just people I hung out with because I was lonely. I studied my sister's face, searching for signs that she was merely trying to make things easier for me, but all I saw was contentment. Besides, she added with a mischievous smile, I think you have reasons of your own for wanting to stay. Before I could question her about that particular statement, Marco called for help with his computer, and the moment passed. But Lucia's words lingered, forcing me to confront feelings I'd been carefully avoiding. The truth was, somewhere between teaching Marco and navigating the dangerous waters of his father's world, I had developed feelings for Marco DeMarco Sr. that went far beyond appropriate employer-employee boundaries. It was foolish, perhaps even dangerous, but undeniable. Especially after Mr. DeMarco's enigmatic question, is it so ridiculous? Had he been suggesting that the rumors of our involvement weren't so far-fetched? Or merely acknowledging that such rumors were an inevitable result of our unusual arrangement? I had no answers, and asking directly felt impossible. So I focused on what I knew for certain. Marco needed me. Lucia was thriving, and whatever complicated emotions existed between Mr. DeMarco and myself would have to remain unexamined for now. Summer arrived with unusual heat, turning the estate gardens into a riot of color and fragrance. Marco, increasingly confident in navigating with his cane, spent hours outdoors, guided by either Lucia or me through the winding paths of the rose garden that had become his favorite place. It was in that garden, on a particularly warm afternoon in late June, that everything changed. Marco had been practicing his orientation skills, counting steps between landmarks, while I followed a few paces behind. Lucia had a tutoring session, and Vincent was maintaining a discreet distance, allowing Marco the illusion of independence while ensuring his safety. "Elena," Marco called suddenly, his head tilting in that particular way that indicated he was concentrating on sounds. "Is that a car coming?" I listened and heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway that curved around the garden. "Yes. It sounds like your father is back from his business trip." Mr. DeMarco had been away for nearly a week, an unusual occurrence that had left the household with a strange sense of suspension, as if we were all holding our breath until his return. Marco's face lit up. "Can we go meet him, please?" I hesitated. Mr. DeMarco typically came to find Marco after returning from trips, often bringing small gifts or souvenirs that his son could appreciate through touch and smell. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," I said carefully. "Your father might have business associates with him, or he might need to freshen up after his journey." Marco's expression fell slightly, but he nodded in understanding. We continued our practice along the garden path, but I could tell his heart wasn't in it anymore. His attention had shifted to the house and the sounds of arrival. We had just reached the fountain at the center of the garden when shouts erupted from the direction of the house. Instinctively, I grabbed Marco, pulling him behind me as Vincent materialized at our side, his hand already reaching inside his jacket for his weapon. "Get him to the safe room," Vincent ordered, his voice taut with controlled panic. "Now." "What's happening?" I asked, my arms tightening around Marco, who had gone rigid with fear. "Just go," Vincent said, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "East entrance, then the passageway behind the library. You know the protocol." I did know. Mr. DeMarco had insisted I memorize emergency procedures in case Marco was ever with me during a security breach. But this was real, not a drill, and my legs felt leaden as I lifted Marco into my arms, despite him being almost too big for me to carry now. "It's going to be all right," I whispered into his hair as I began moving quickly toward the house, Vincent covering our retreat. Just a precaution. The sound of gunfire shattered that reassurance. Sharp cracks that seemed to come from inside the mansion itself. "Lucia," I gasped, nearly stumbling as I remembered my sister was inside, unaware of whatever danger had breached the estate's defenses. "Focus on Marco," Vincent hissed, practically pushing us toward a side door that would lead to the east wing. "The team will protect Lucia." I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, but my heart was being torn in two directions as I carried Marco through the door and into the cool dimness of the house. "Elena, what's happening?" Marco whispered, his voice trembling. "Is Papa okay?" "I don't know, sweetheart," I answered honestly, setting him down once we were inside. I grabbed his hand, preparing to run to the safe room as instructed. "But we need to get somewhere secure first, then we'll find out." We had just reached the corridor outside the library when a figure stepped into our path. A man I'd never seen before, holding a gun with practiced ease. "Well, well," he said with a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. Just who I was looking for, the DeMarco heir and his beloved nanny. Vincent raised his weapon, positioning himself between us and the stranger. But before he could fire, another shot rang out from somewhere behind us. Vincent crumpled to the ground, blood blooming across his pristine white shirt. "Vincent!" Marco cried, his unseeing eyes wide with terror at the sound of the bodyguard's fall. The stranger gestured with his gun. "Move, both of you, and no heroics, Ms. Vasquez. I'd hate to have to hurt the boy just because you did something stupid." He knew my name. This wasn't a random attack. It was targeted, planned. My mind raced, trying to recall everything Mr. DeMarco had told me about what to do in a worst-case scenario. Keep Marco alive. Keep him talking. Buy time. "What do you want?" I asked, pushing Marco slightly behind me, my hand firmly gripping his. The man chuckled. "Just a little leverage in my negotiations with DeMarco. Nothing personal. My father will kill you," Marco said with sudden fierce certainty, his voice stronger than I would have expected. "If you hurt Elena or me, he won't stop until you're dead." Brave words from a blind kid, the man said. But there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a momentary hesitation that told me Marco's words had struck home. Everyone in their world knew Marco DeMarco Sr., his reputation for brutal retribution when crossed. Taking advantage of that hesitation, I squeezed Marco's hand in a pattern we had developed. 3 quick pulses, our private signal for "trust me and follow my lead." "The safe room," I said loudly, my voice deliberately shaky. "It's this way. We were heading there when you found us." The man smiled triumphantly. "Perfect. You're going to take me there now, and we'll wait for DeMarco together. A nice family reunion." I nodded, turning slowly as if to lead him down the corridor toward the library. The moment his attention shifted slightly to check the hallway behind him, I dropped to the floor, pulling Marco down with me, and kicked out hard at the man's knees. He staggered, cursing, as I rolled Marco beneath a heavy antique table against the wall. Minimal protection, but better than nothing. "Run!" I screamed at Marco, knowing he knew this hallway well enough to navigate it without sight. "To the library!" Marco hesitated for only a second, before scrambling out from under the table and running with surprising speed toward the library doors just yards away, his hands outstretched to guide himself. The man recovered quickly, lunging for Marco, but I threw myself at his legs, tackling him to the ground. The gun clattered across the marble floor as we struggled. He was stronger, but I had the desperation of someone protecting a child I had come to love as my own. "You bitch!" he snarled, striking me hard across the face. My vision blurred, but I held on, clawing and kicking as he tried to reach the fallen weapon. I was losing the fight, my strength ebbing as his hands closed around my throat, when the sound of running footsteps echoed down the corridor. The pressure on my throat suddenly vanished as the man was wrenched away from me with violent force. Through watering eyes, I saw Mr. DeMarco slam the intruder against the wall with murderous fury. There was blood on his usually immaculate suit, a cut above his eye, but he moved with lethal precision as he delivered a series of blows that left the other man crumpled on the floor. "Elena!" Marco's voice called from the library doorway, where he stood clutching the frame. "Elena, are you okay?" I tried to answer, but my throat burned, and all that came out was a hoarse whisper. Mr. DeMarco turned at the sound of his son's voice, his expression transforming from cold rage to profound relief. "Marco," he said, crossing to his son in 3 long strides and gathering him into his arms. "Are you hurt?" Marco shook his head, clinging to his father. "No, but Elena, the bad man was hurting her." Mr. DeMarco looked over at me, still sprawled on the floor, and something in his eyes shifted, a softening that made my heart stutter despite the pain and fear. "I know," he said, his voice gentle as he kept one arm around Marco and extended the other to help me up. "But she saved you." Just like I knew she would. His hand was warm and strong as it closed around mine, pulling me to my feet, and, unexpectedly, into the embrace he shared with Marco. For a moment we stood there, a tableau of unlikely family forged in crisis. Then reality intruded, as security personnel flooded the corridor, securing the unconscious intruder and checking Vincent, who was wounded, but alive. "Lucia," I managed to croak through my bruised throat. "Where's Lucia? Safe." "Mr. DeMarco assured me, his arm tightening around my shoulders. "In the panic room with Mrs. Alvarez, they locked down as soon as the breach was detected." Relief washed over me, so powerful it made my knees weak. Mr. DeMarco seemed to sense it, supporting more of my weight as he guided Marco and me away from the scene, toward his private quarters at the end of the hall. "It's over," he said quietly. "They came for me, but we were ready. My security team has neutralized all threats." I didn't ask what neutralized meant in this context. Some questions were better left unasked in Marco DeMarco's world. Later, after Marco had been settled in his room with Lucia keeping him company, after the doctors had examined my throat and declared the bruising painful but not serious, Mr. DeMarco found me on the balcony outside his study, staring up at the stars. "You should be resting," he said, coming to stand beside me at the railing. I turned to look at him, noting the fresh bandage above his eye where the cut had been stitched. "So should you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've had worse." Silence fell between us, comfortable despite the day's violence. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low and intent. "You saved my son today." I shook my head slightly. "We saved each other." "No," he insisted, turning to face me fully. "You could have run, saved yourself. But you stayed, put yourself between Marco and danger without hesitation." He paused, his blue eyes searching mine. "Why?" The question deserved honesty, despite my raw throat and aching body. "Because I love him," I said simply. "He became mine to protect the moment I found him crying alone in that room months ago." Mr. DeMarco reached out slowly, as if afraid I might pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from my face. His fingers lingered, tracing the bruise forming on my cheekbone with surprising tenderness. "And what about his father?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did he become yours too?" My heart hammered against my ribs as I met his gaze. "I think you know the answer to that." In the months since I'd first encountered the feared Mafia boss, I had seen him transform from a distant, intimidating figure to a father desperate to protect his son while giving him the freedom to truly live. I had watched him extend that protection to include my sister and me, bringing us into his dangerous but fiercely loyal world. And somewhere along the way, against all reason, I had fallen in love with him. "Say it," he urged, his hand now cradling my face. "I need to hear you say it, Elena." "I love you," I whispered, the words both terrifying and liberating. God help me. But I do. The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds, unexpected and breathtaking. Without another word, he drew me into his arms, his lips finding mine in a kiss that felt inevitable, as if every moment since I'd first set foot in his house had been leading us here. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "I've been fighting this for months," he admitted, telling myself it was inappropriate, dangerous, impossible. But today, when I thought I might lose you both. His voice trailed off, emotion making it rough. "What happens now?" I asked, suddenly aware of the complications our feelings created. "Your world is still dangerous. There will always be threats." "Now," he said, pulling back to meet my eyes with newfound certainty, "we build something better, together. A real family for Marco, for Lucia." He paused, his expression growing serious. "It won't be easy. My business—" "Your criminal empire, you mean?" I interrupted gently. He didn't deny it. "Yes, it complicates things. But for Marco, and for you, I'm willing to consider changes, legitimate enterprises, a different legacy." The promise in those words, not just of love, but of transformation, took my breath away. I knew enough of his world to understand what such a shift would cost him, what risks it would entail. "Are you sure?" I asked. "That's a massive undertaking. I've never been more certain of anything," he replied, taking my hands in his. "Marco deserves a father he can be proud of openly, and you deserve a man whose name you can take without fear." The implication wasn't lost on me. "Is that a proposal, Mr. DeMarco?" I asked, my voice teasing despite the seriousness of the moment. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually stern features. "Not yet, but soon. When the time is right, when I've begun making good on my promises." He brushed his lips against mine again, gently. "For now, it's enough to know that what began with a blind boy's tears and a maid's compassion might end with something like happiness for all of us." As if on cue, the door to the study opened, and Marco's voice called out, "Papa? Elena? Are you out here?" "We're here, Marco," I answered, my voice stronger now despite my injuries. He stepped onto the balcony, Lucia right behind him with a supportive hand on his shoulder. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I keep thinking about today, Mr. DeMarco released one of my hands to reach for his son, drawing him into our circle. It's over now, he assured him, and we're all safe. Together. Together. Marco repeated, his unseeing eyes somehow finding my face with unerring accuracy. Like a real family? I looked at Mr. DeMarco, at the question in his eyes that matched Marco's spoken one, then at Lucia, who was watching us with a knowing smile that said she'd seen this coming long before I had. Yes, I said, my heart full as I squeezed Mr. DeMarco's hand. Like a real family. Marco's face broke into a radiant smile. I knew it, he said triumphantly. I knew from the very first day when you were the only one who noticed me crying. In that moment, under the vast summer sky, with Marco's hand in mine and Mr. DeMarco's arm around us both, I understood that sometimes the most dangerous decisions, like reaching out to a crying child despite the rules, like loving a man whose world was built on fear, lead not to disaster, but to salvation.